Okay, so we have hit episode 3 of HBO's The Outsider. This is the first episode not directed by Jason Bateman, and this is also pretty much where the character of Terry Maitland, played by Jason Bateman, pieces out. You don't really see him at all in this episode, maybe for a second in a flashback, but that's about it. This episode was directed by Andrew Bernstein and also written by Richard Price. We get a big character introduction of Holly Gibney in this episode, played by up-and-coming superstar who was just nominated for an Oscar, Cynthia Erivo. So I'm going to break my review down into 3 parts because there's 3 plot lines going on here at once in this episode. One is Jack Hoskins' plot line, the other is this prisoner we meet, and the main one is Ralph and the gang. I will start with Ralph's. So I actually like the opening scene with Ralph here because it was a really nice touch visually, meaning a bunch of things with him just visiting his son's grave, and then across from it seeing a new grave being dug for Frankie Peterson, just really adding weight to the character and his motivations now to get things right. I really like that the show added this storyline that his son actually died in the past. It makes his character stronger, which the book was kind of missing something like that as an anchor for Ralph, so props to HBO for thinking that up. But we see Ralph still is just not taking his leave of absence to relax. He's just constantly working on this case, and he's finding out on the computer that Terry Maitland's old man, who's in this senior home, was actually arrested for aggravated assault back in the day. So this is going to start to focus on him looking into this senior citizen home now that Terry visited to see his dad in Dayton. But you'll start to see in this episode there, without a doubt, is some filler going on, which wasn't the case in the first 2 episodes. I mean, some serious slow beats. Perfect example of this is the next scene. We see Ralph just on his computer, and again, he's just looking at footage of the day at the courthouse, and it really doesn't go anywhere. It's just him reflecting on it and being tired. The first 2 episodes blew through about half of the book and went at breakneck speed, but it was super thrilling. This is now like the complete opposite type of pace from the first 2, and you see that it's not just a slow burn, it's like really, really slow, where maybe it feels even slower because of how fast the first 2 episodes are. But I kept thinking in my head, one critic had said that some of the episodes feel like CSI on sleeping pills, and I might kind of see that now, especially in this scene where Eunice is explaining to Ralph what they found at this barn and all the evidence, and that he connects it was Terry's belt at the barn, but it had his fingerprints on it, but they were different forms. Some were more faded out. He's kind of going at a thing where it's like old ancient Terry is one of these prints and the other is like a new form Terry, and it's just a weird case. They've never seen anything like this. But the way it's kind of editing to the forensics lab and them showing the belt was kind of corny, and again felt like CSI. So Ralph realizes all this stuff is they're finding out, and they need to kind of join forces with who used to be their competition, and Howie and Alec. I really like the cinematography in this scene where we first see all 4 of them together in this office building where it's so far out, and then it slowly zooms in through the whole dialogue and actually ends the scene where we're fully in the office. I thought that's kind of cool. And I like how the cinematographer of the show is really just making it always feel like a Stephen King story, with having this eerie feel with so many long shots, so many wide shots, and always kind of making you realize this is about, again, an outsider, kind of making the camera work as a spectator of what's going on from everything, and distant but watching. But in this scene, we see that Alec is the one who suggests they should get a really good private investigator in Holly Gibney to help them out in the Dayton location. Now, Holly Gibney is a character that appears multiple times in the Stephen King universe. I have not read Mr. Mercedes, which is the book she's originally from. So to me, she is a new character, but I really like her introduction here of her apartment room, and you see that she's already got like this shrine. You got religious statues here. You got like a voodoo doll thing. So you're already getting a vibe visually of what this character is about. And little things like she's very ritualistic. You could see that when she goes to her bar and she tells the guy, "You're in my seat." And I've never seen this actress of Cynthia Erivo yet. I haven't watched the role she was nominated an Oscar for Harriet Tubman, but I love what I see so far. I mean, she makes this character really exciting, and she's really good at talking really fast as playing a character who has an overactive mind, and she's spitting out a lot of hard dialogue just to grasp and say so quickly and still let us understand it, so props to her. Now, before we see Ralph and Alec fly down to see Holly because she's afraid of flying, we get this scene of Ralph at his shrink again, and we learn again that him and his wife almost didn't make it during their child dying, and there's this line where the shrink's like, "What was it like for you when things were still rough?" And we get this cornball scene of him thinking of a flash of him getting in a bar fight come on. This just was silly to me. There's been a lot of silly scenes like this. It made more sense for the character of Jack Hoskins when he had like the wedgie scene in the previous episode, but for Ralph, like, do we keep having to have these beats of just these like angry moments with these characters that are like just over the top? And this is just another slow scene, the shrink scene. And the shrink trying to get to that he shouldn't be just working all the time. And I don't know, again, it's kind of getting repetitive with these themes with Ralph and his wife, and it's slowing the pace a bit. So things get more interesting, though, when we see Ralph and Alec are with Holly, and you see she has an incredible memory when they're just talking about the Mets-Cub game, and she knows all the stats from years ago. And she starts showing what she could do and how much she is a believer, really, in any possibilities, and bringing up this idea that she calls might be a myth, is just this doppelganger, and that everyone in the world has a non-biological double. But Ralph, here you see, says, I have no tolerance for the unexplainable, so they couldn't be more opposite. And she says, well, then you have no tolerance for me. And we learn more about Holly here. There's a kid, she was brought to a bunch of shrinks, and that basically her parents thought something was wrong with her. The shrinks had no idea what it was. And Ralph sympathized with this and says, like, hey, like, they were trying to change what you just were naturally. My favorite line of this whole scene, though, is when Holly gets up but comes back and goes to Ralph, you don't like to drink that much, but you did it to make me comfortable. Thank you. I love she's socially awkward in that sense, but she's also great at reading people and will just state the obvious things that most people don't actually say out loud. And they're doing a good job, though, of setting up like how Ralph needs to open his mind now. So at the Maitland household, Jessa's still getting visited by this man, and she tells her mom that this man told her they need to call Ralph and tell him to stop, and that if Ralph doesn't, something very bad is going to happen to him. Jessa gets the opportunity to even tell Ralph this herself. And you can see Ralph here is a little spooked. And there's a little scene here in the Maitland household where Howie says to Ralph that Holly is a bull-goose loony, but she's amazing at what she does. Because he knows Ralph is already kind of thinking she's weird, saying that she's unique. But reinforcing, like, this is what makes her so special and good at her job. So you see Janine now takes a crack at Jessa and really getting into what's going on with this man. And she says the first time she saw him, he looked like Terry, her father. The second time, he was a blurry version of him. And then this time, he didn't look anything like Terry. And he was inky and muscly. But this kind of got a little corny too, where we get this scene after this where Janine comes back to the house to visit Glory Maitland and wants to check on them. And then Glory tells the story of the oldest daughter, Mia, the time she saw the movie Leprechaun, and how good of a father Terry was because he knew how to get her to realize it wasn't a real thing. And she just says to Janine at one point, how did you live with this? Meaning her losing her kid, and now Glory's grieving Terry, and she says, well, it's impossible. Okay, but this is super sleep-inducing of a scene here, especially already an incredibly slow episode. I think this is where, in America, if you're watching this live, you start to close your eyes just a little bit. So where the good stuff, again, keeps happening is where Holly's on the screen. And we see Holly now is backtracking where the Maitlands were on their vacation in Dayton. She goes to the motel room they stayed in. And you see when she stays in the motel room, she kind of is going to try to connect to this all, probably supernaturally. She's got her ways about things, and she has this little shrine she brought from her apartment and sets it up in the motel room. And it was really strange. She meets the mall security guy, and he's super sketchy, so I wonder what's up with that. So we see Holly actually goes to the senior home now, where the older Maitland was, and we learn that there was already reporters and detectives there trying to interrogate him. And it wasn't even about Terry they were asking. But when Holly informs Ralph about this on the phone, Ralph's kind of like, okay, that's it, that's your lead. So Holly feels insecure about that. She knows it's not this most meaty thing, and she says, time to time, I want to hear the voice of someone on my side. I love again that she's so transparent and blunt, and you see it setting up this really cool relationship between Ralph and Holly, where Ralph knows he's kind of being harsh, not answering, and that if this is going to work with him and Holly, he's going to have to open his mind a bit here. And it is that kind of classic tale of Holly being someone who's a believer trying to convert a doubter in Ralph. But in Holly's investigating, she finds that two sisters were found dead, and a local hospital worker was convicted of killing them. Now, this is the man's story we'll jump into now we've seen all episode, in the jail cell. So the strange thing about this story with this mystery child killer is that it's a weird continuation of Terry's storyline that never got resolved, where he was in jail and a guy was like, yo, child killer, I'm coming for you. I get it's supposed to relate that, okay, this is another guy who's kind of, I guess, in Terry's same situation, that he's being wrongfully accused of something and he has to suffer the consequences. But it just feels so weird that it's like the same thing over again, but now we're just seeing it played out fully. with a different character. It almost makes you wonder, why did we even get that part with Terry, with the prisoner? I thought that was just weird, if we're gonna get it now anyway. But you see this guy, he rips out of his glasses one of the frames and is now sharpening it because he knows someone's gonna come for him. And you see, when this happens towards the end of the episode, there is like a prison guard who's just corrupt and lets the other killer out, and he wants to take care of him. But before he lets this man attack him, he just slits his own throat, and that's that. So it's just more, we could assume, innocent life lost and framed by whatever is going on with this outsider. And to wrap things up, let's jump into Jack Hoskins' story. Now, my biggest complaint, and this was my complaint in the book too, like the story It of Stephen King, he repeats some beats exactly from that in character types, and this goes from the bully in It to now Jack Hoskins in The Outsider, where he is just this completely awful person, and now he's going to be screwing everything up for our good guys. So you see, when Jack Hoskins is called to this scene of the crime where Terry's clothes were at the barn, he goes late because he stops at a strip joint first. But we get a good scene out of this. We get some pure horror here when there's actually a jump scare where a figure appears to him in the barn, and then from behind, this something or someone is doing something to his neck. And what we'll get from this is a couple scenes, one at the strip club, one of his own home, where he's just getting more and more pain in his neck. And then by the end, this episode actually closes where it's like fully red and disgusting, and he's like, whatever you need me to do. Again, hitting on a beat from It, where there is a true villain now having his pawn in someone who is a jerk, and they're using that to their advantage. Just like Pennywise was with the bully kid, here we have the outsider doing that with Jack Hoskins, clearly. And that frustrated me in the book. It's not something to get mad at the show about, because again, this was Stephen King's idea, but it is just lazy because it's so similar. And in general, it's not the most interesting thing when you have just like the completely one-note character that's just a complete a-hole, kind of just trying to wreck everything. It gets predictable in that sense and just bland. And cartoony in a way, too. I mean, just the scenes with the wedgie, and even in this episode where he's saying this stripper should dance to whale music, is like, I don't know. But as a whole, this episode had really good scenes with Holly. I love the actress playing her. Ben Mendelsohn's still killing it as Ralph. So when they're together on screen, I think we're getting the best stuff there. I really like the scene in the barn with the horror element to it with Jack Hoskins. But the prisoner storyline wasn't that interesting. I know it's to connect some dots here, but it just felt too similar to Terry's exact situation in the prison cell. And the pace here was really slow. And I'm fine with slow burns, but if they're keeping you hooked, and this, to me, had some real filler scenes. One being the one with Ralph's wife talking to Glory Maitland about Leprechaun, and the other being just scenes like Ralph just on the computer, just again reaffirming he's working late and he's tired and he should calm down. Like, it just felt disappointing compared to the first two episodes, but again, we'll see. There's a lot of potential here, but for me, this episode is going to get a 7.8, whereas the first two I had in the 9 range. So let me know what you thought of it down below, though. Maybe you totally agree with me, maybe you totally disagree and think it was amazing. I'd love to hear your thoughts and any theories you got. And again, no book spoilers here. None in the comments. If that happens, I'm deleting it. Keep that for somewhere else. We're just talking about the show here. And please make sure to subscribe to my channel. I'll be reviewing Better Call Saul. I just did Servant on Apple TV+. I also do celebrity interviews and movie reviews as well, so you don't want to miss any of those. And please follow me at SteveVarley1 on Twitter and Instagram for more of me. And I'll see you next time.